Okay, Matt. Of
What's
all
up?
the scientists in the world, why do you think Einstein is the most famous? Like, why is his name synonymous with genius? And
Because of the Manhattan Project.
interesting. Yeah, so anyway, that was my point of like why I wanted to read this book. Is like, okay, Einstein is like a name that is synonymous with genius. Like you think of a scientist, you think of Albert Einstein.
Hmm.
But like why? Like what was it about him that made him that like legend tier?
Hmm.
And I have a lot of theories about this, which we
Okay.
can start talking about.
Yeah, cool.
All right, the first one is that he looked really weird.
Could be.
Like he had like an iconic look, like where he had like an afro and like a
Yeah,
mustache
yeah.
and stuff. Whereas like if you think of like Max Planck,
Yeah.
who's like one of his contemporaries,
Yeah.
like can you picture this dude? Like you definitely can't.
Mustache. Some kind of mustache, I guess.
Like Isaac Newton, like has like those curls in his hair.
Oh, yeah.
So he's like kind of like you can picture what he looks like.
Yeah.
Whereas like these other scientists, like can you picture Oppenheimer? Like
Yeah. I love Oppenheimer. This is why, so J. Robert Oppenheimer was the
Yeah.
reason that I changed my name to S. Matthew English.
really?
Yeah.
Just you like the name.
I just thought it was stylish. Like J. Robert Oppenheimer. I like that.
All right, it's cool. But anyway, so we're gonna be breaking down a couple books right now. The first one is Walter Isaacson's biography of Albert Einstein, which I thought was great. You had read it previously. I just read it just now, and I think it does like give the answer to the question of why Albert Einstein's so famous. But anyway, the other so one, he looked weird. That I think is important, but also like his story is kind of interesting because he was like there's like a kind of like story that like he failed high school math. That's like something they tell you in the US, which isn't true, but like
Yeah.
he was definitely like not the top of his class student,
Mm.
and he couldn't get a job in academia, which is
Right,
really
right.
interesting. So like he was like poor and didn't have a job, and he gets this job to work at like a patent office in Switzerland,
Hmm.
and he starts working as a patent clerk, which I think is like actually a secretly dope job because he just like sat in this office all day and got to look at like patent applications. So like if you understand science, which he did because he studied it in school, and you're on the cutting edge of science, and then you get to look at like other people's interpretations of your cutting edge science, it's like a really cool job. Like for years,
Yeah.
you get to do this. And I guess that he kept up with the cutting edge of physics and eventually comes up with the theory of relativity, or at least at this point, this is 1905. He publishes a paper on this, like, I think it's called like a special theory of relativity, which is different than a general
Yeah,
theory.
yeah.
Like this is going to be like something. But anyway, like it's kind of a crazy story because like he's not in academia. There's all these like dope scientists at universities studying like the universe. And then there's just some dude who like works in a patent office who publishes this paper that is like
Satoshi.
yeah, exactly. It's just some dude out of nowhere. And I think that that's another reason why like he's so synonymous is like it's like when like Tom Brady is like really famous because he was like a 6th-round draft pick. And it like makes no sense that he ended up becoming like this good of a quarterback. It's like this crazy story where if like you're expected to be really good, like it's not surprising almost.
Yeah, it's a good hero narrative.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, he publishes this paper and I'm not really sure. Like, I don't know. Can you explain the theory of relativity? I'm not even sure that I can. But
It has something. So, just from what I remember from that book, it's something like if you're on a train that's moving forward quickly, and then you throw a baseball from the train, or something like that.
they use the analogy of like lightning in the book. Like that's what he explains. Which is probably another reason that he is really famous is he's good at explaining things like in normal terms because he like didn't work in academia and like had a normal job and was like a normal person and stuff.
Yeah.
But he would like make all these analogies. But he's like some analogy of when like lightning strikes, like if two trains are moving in opposite directions,
Oh yeah, yeah.
like if like you pass the lightning strike, the thing that's like moving and you are going in opposite directions and you pass a lightning bolt that hits right in the middle at the exact same time, the person that's going like towards the lightning bolt will see the lightning before the other person that's moving away from it because there's a fixed speed of light. And the idea is like I guess when things would happen simultaneously, like what does the term simultaneous mean? And there was the prevailing theory at the time was this thing called like they had this idea of this thing called the ether, which is like this universal substance that like existed all throughout. This was like I don't know, like they call this like field theory. Like I don't really understand fields that much, but there's like some universal field and everything happens relative to this absolute truth. And it's kind of interesting because this is kind of what Ethereum is also, right?
Yeah, it's
the
literally
crypto-
called ether.
right, because of this. And it's like this idea that there's some universal truth and everything happens like relative to it. But Einstein's theory was that there is no light ether, right? He was the first person to propose that the way that all scientists were looking at this is incorrect and that things all happen relative to each other and each relative observation is exactly as I guess valid as each other relative observation. And he obviously didn't just say this, like he had formulas and stuff to like prove this. And it's kind of like a breakthrough paper, and it's explained really well. And he doesn't get like any reaction to it basically when he publishes it, because he's just some dude in a patent office that like wrote some shit down on a piece of paper and got it published. But the first person that notices that something like really interesting is here is this guy Max Planck, who's like also like really famous because of that Planck's constant thing that like everyone has to know. Who's like, he's like ingrained in academia and people like revere him.
Oh,
and
yeah. In Germany. So
Yeah.
there's these two research institutes. One is called the Fraunhofer Institute, and that's where I was working, and this is for applied research. And the other is called the Max Planck Institute, and this is for theoretical research. And those are like the two institutes all over the country.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because he's really famous and successful.
Yep,
But
yep.
he's this guy that has a lot of credibility that's like, yo, we should actually like look at this stuff that this dude from the patent office like put out, because it's kind of dope. And he starts getting kind of credence from, you know, his contemporaries then, and gets like started into these circles, but he's still not like famous. Like he doesn't get a job like as a teacher or into academia. It takes him like years.
Yeah, and people didn't like him, I remember, and stuff like this.
Yeah,
Weren't
it's
people
really
trying to block his candidacy?
Yeah, for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah.
But oh man, okay, so we're there in the story. Also, he has some fucking crazy family drama at this time, which is so interesting. So like Einstein, like he's on the like I have this tier in my mind of like worst father/family figure like imaginable, but you single-handedly push humanity forward, so it's kind of okay. And like Steve Jobs would be in this tier, for example.
Yeah,
but like
yeah.
Einstein's in this tier. So his first wife, they have a kid together, and nobody knew that they had a kid until after he died, and like people were writing biographies of him, and they like found letters with his first wife like talking about a kid, and they're like, what the
Was she the one who's like a physics student that they met together?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
And they have a kid, and like no one knows what happened to her. Like still to this day, no one, like she either died or like was given up for adoption, and Einstein never met her. Like he was like working in like Switzerland at the time, and she was in Germany. And yeah, it's a crazy story. Like some girl made a documentary about it. Like she tried to find the lost Einstein kid and couldn't do it. But
Interesting.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. But he like divorced his
Like
first.
the Da Vinci Code. Isn't the Da Vinci Code like trying to find Jesus' kid or something like that?
Oh yeah, like an heir
Yeah.
to it is something like this. Because right, like this person would have like valuable genes or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then he like gets remarried to some other girl, and it's also really interesting to like all the incest that happens in the scientific community, because like all these scientists are like banging each other.
Yeah.
Because they probably like only talk about like physics, and they only want someone that they can talk about physics with.
Yeah. Also, though, I really like that at the end of his life, he was hooking up with a Russian spy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also really funny too. Yeah, his family drama gets whack. I guess like we'll quickly go through his life, and then we'll get to him banging a Russian spy. Because also like it's funny that like J. Edgar Hoover was like on his trail at this time also, which is like
Crazy.
hilarious because like he was crazy, and we should definitely read a J. Edgar Hoover biography.
Oh, totally.
But he didn't understand that he was banging a Russian spy, even though he was like trying to like out Einstein as like a traitor or something. It's really funny. But anyway,
Oh,
so
because they were pacifists, right? And they didn't want to use nuclear weapons or something like this.
I think it was he just wasn't in on McCarthyism, and like J. Edgar Hoover was very in on McCarthyism.
Oh yeah, was he communistic? I don't remember.
No, not at all. I think okay, but let's just do the quick history.
Also,
of
it's
Einstein
also
then.
interesting. It's kind of tangential, but that Israel started out as a communist country.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it still in very many ways is. I
know,
think.
but I always thought it was fascinating that Israel did not become an ally of the Soviet Union and the communist bloc, or like communist China.
Oh, you mean like in the Cold War?
Yeah, as a communist country or a socialist country or whatever.
Huh. Well, I think it's probably because just the pogroms in Russia.
Totally.
Like,
That's totally
like
the
no
reason, I think.
Jews wanted
Yeah,
to.
yeah,
But yeah, that is kind of interesting, like ideologically wise. But anyway, so Einstein is like kind of like having this weird family drama, and oh, it's so interesting. So like, okay, Einstein is Jewish, right? And this is like World War I era Germany. So like, I think that's another reason, right? In terms of like why he's so famous is like anyone that was a Jewish scientist in Germany in like from like World War I, in between World War I and World War II, like it's just like a great backdrop to like be have like notoriety, because there's so much drama that like went down with it. But the story is really crazy because like he basically had to like make these decisions of whether or not you were going to like assimilate into the German society, which is to say like, I am a Prussian nationalist. I am like, my loyalty is to the German state, and like, this is it. But like Einstein like was not a German nationalist at all. He was very like into Switzerland. He like liked the Swiss vibe, and he got Swiss citizenship. And he's also like a pacifist, and like thought nationalism was kind of stupid and just like wanted to do science. So like this like made him kind of like an enemy. And they're so interesting because like there's a lot of these Jewish scientists like at the time that are like deciding whether or not to assimilate, and they all like go their different ways, and they all have like, so like one of his contemporaries is this guy named Fritz Haber, who's like the guy that invented like the Haber process, which is how to like extract nitrogen from the air. And he like made all the chemical weapons for the German
exactly. Like mustard gas and stuff like that.
during World War One.
Yeah.
But like Einstein's like best friends with this dude. And like his wife goes to live with Fritz Haber at some point. Like they're like having some drama, and like his wife like goes to live with the Habers, and like Einstein has to write a contract with his wife, which is so crazy. This is one of my favorite anecdotes in the book. He made a contract with his wife where he basically made rules for like living with him, where he's like, okay, if I like leave the study, then you must leave the study also. Like if I decide that I can't see you, like then you need to leave the house immediately. Like you need, like he just like made her sign this contract like while she's living with the Habers, like as he's like working on the German war machine. It's a really freaking crazy drama like that goes down with all these scientists. But anyway, so this is a thing, and I think there's this very famous paper by Einstein in 1905 which proposes special relativity, which doesn't get him that much fame, but in the some like upper echelon of the scientific community, it gets him like a lot of notoriety. And this is eventually able to parlay this into a professorship where he does work as a professor at some university, and eventually creates his general theory of relativity.
At a university in Switzerland?
What did you say that in the mic? Sorry.
Is it at a university in Switzerland? I don't remember.
I think it's in Prague, maybe. Or yeah. Yeah, it's not in Germany, at least initially. He's in like Prague, and that's another like more family drama. Cause like I don't think his like wife like lives with him, which is another weird thing they did back then. It was like
a lot of professors do that. When I was doing my PhD studies, because I guess professorships are pretty hard to get. So his wife lived in Leipzig, but he was a professor in Cologne, and he would just travel to Leipzig and Cologne.
Yeah, exactly. It's very So I guess that's probably even more so back then when transport was like harder. So like his wives are like never living with him. Yeah, his family drama is really strange. You should like whoever's listening to this should definitely look this up. It's like very interesting. But anyway, so he is working as a professor and comes up in 1915. He proposes the general theory of relativity. So I guess this is a bigger deal. Like again, my science knowledge is lacking, but I guess like having a general theory is way more interesting than having a special theory. And I think the idea was that like his special theory of relativity applied for things that were in constant velocities, but didn't account for like variable velocities. And his general theory of relativity applied for like to everything, even in variable velocity. And this is also his 1905 paper doesn't say anything about gravity, but the 1915 paper is what like basically says that gravity is the curvature of space-time. Like this is like, I mean, really, it is a fucking outlandish idea, right? Because like back then, like people didn't really talk about like space-time or like these weird things about like they didn't really understand the way that light worked. Like there was a lot. That's another reason, right? Like that he might be so famous is that it was kind of like a transition point for science where there was a lot of things that they had figured out, right? They just like invented electricity and like they'd made like, you know, cars and trains and things like this. And it seemed like the Industrial Revolution's in full boot and they were figuring out a lot of science, but like light still like fucked with people. Like people did not really understand it. And that was kind of like the new frontier that needed to be broken through. And his papers were the first things to do things that are now common knowledge, like say, well, light can behave both like a wave and a particle. Like that was Einstein that, you know, proposed the first theories on this. And, you know, things like, like gravity is the curvature of space-time, and that light can bend when going around gravitational masses and things like this. And again, he's still like proposing all this stuff in relative obscurity at this time. Because they're just papers and they're just theories. You need like experimental evidence.
But that's really interesting to me too. So I think it's fascinating that he discovered all this stuff without doing any empirical validation, and that all of it was just some ideas that he had and thought experiments. So it's just a fascinating way to hit on some universal truth, like just through your own mind somehow.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. And I think that's why scientists regard him as so incredible, was that his creativity was almost like unmatched. It's like really like there's all these dope scientists at the time, like Max Planck and Poincaré and others. And they were at the cutting edge, but didn't come up with this stuff. because it required like these really interesting thought experiments. And I think
Fermi also, wasn't he? And also, this is the time of Feynman too, and Einstein were kind of contemporaries at the end of their life, weren't they?
yeah, sure. Feynman, I think, is a bit older, right?
But Feynman worked on the Manhattan Project. I think he's a bit younger.
Oh yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
younger.
yeah,
Yeah, a bit younger. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess there's like a bifurcation at some point that happens with the like quantum mechanics guys and like the Manhattan Project. But the guys that were like before that, like they didn't come up with the stuff Einstein did. And he wasn't at the like top tier of academia. And it was because I think like he was working in his patent office and doing all this, like seeing all this practical stuff and having to think in terms of like practicality and these like thought experiments in his head. It's also interesting that you could even do this in the first place back then, because I think this is kind of like a tragedy of like modern science, which is like back even up until like, right, like Einstein, you could come up with like groundbreaking science just by thinking and like doing math. And I feel like it doesn't really work this way anymore, where it's kind of almost like you need like particle accelerators to do like you can't like just like
I think that's also part of it. The reason he's so famous
is because he's like the last breed of someone that could
yeah, and also physics hasn't really moved that far. Like the people that came after him didn't move the needle as much as he. I think like even this Large Hadron Collider, I don't think they discovered ever this God particle that they were looking for.
Yeah, I thought about this, right? Because you had a moment like it's okay. Let me come back to this in 1 second, because the point I was gonna make. So he's at this point where he has these groundbreaking theories that are being resisted by some people, and this is also really interesting. Like there's like this whole movement in Germany to like deny his theories because they were somehow Jewish, which I think is really interesting. Like there was this dude, I forget his name, that like started this like Deutschen Science, which is like its own like university to like just remove the Jewishness of like the cutting edge science. Oh, dude, it's so fascinating though. It's like this idea, because it's not just Einstein, right? Like there's this guy named George Cantor, who's like a mathematician that came up with set theory. And like set theory is like super abstract, like math, right? Where you're like dealing with like infinity and like what if you have sets with multiple infinities and shit.
Oh yeah.
And like this was also like dismissed as being like somehow Jewish, like this idea that there's like everything's relative to each other in like an abstract sense, and there's no like universal truth is seen like, oh, it was so fascinating to like read like how seriously like all these people took this. But like, yeah, it's interesting because he was basically saying that there is no like absolute universal truth, right? That's kind of what this theory of relativity is. But anyway, it's being resisted by top tier academia, partly due to anti-Semitism, partly because people just like don't understand it or like think it's just way too crazy. And he's not going to become famous till there's like actual experimental evidence to confirm that his theory is correct. Okay, so the way that you would confirm this, right, is that you could actually observe something that has enough mass or like enough gravity to bend space-time. You could observe light bending around the massive object.
Yeah, so like an eclipse, right?
Right. So it would be great if you could do this with Jupiter, but you can't because it's not massive enough. So you need to do it with the sun. And the sun is too bright. You can't like measure light coming from it because it's just one ball of light.
Oh, but it bends around the moon when there's a complete solar eclipse. Yeah.
So it's like this crazy like weird thing about our solar system where like the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but the sun is 400 times further away than the moon. And it's like a complete coincidence that they're like exactly the same size in the sky.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy. So you have these total solar eclipses where like the moon just like completely surrounds the sun, but like perfectly where like light could still bend around. And there was some way that he proposed that you could actually, an astronomer could measure his proposed curvature of space-time. And like this would be a fucking big deal like if someone could actually like do his measurements. And the first time he tries to do this is like the first eclipse, I think, is in 1915, right after he proposes this paper. And this is during World War One. So it's really funny. So the eclipse is only going to be in Russia. That's where like the eclipse path is. And Germany's obviously at war with Russia at this time. And like their government has just like fallen in everything. So he contracts with the German astronomer to go to Russia and like measure the eclipse. And like you can like picture this dude with like this crazy like camera equipment and whatever, like going to some weird woods in Russia, and he gets captured by the Russian army.
Oh my God.
And he like has to explain. He's like, no, I'm not spying on you, obviously. I'm measuring the curvature of space time. You know, like it's just like, and obviously the Russians don't buy it, and he gets captured. So yeah. So anyway, like the first guy he sends to measure this gets captured and doesn't get to measure the eclipse. So it takes until 1919, which is the second time that this eclipse comes around.
Wasn't it in Chile that they did it or something?
I'm not
like that?
sure where they did it actually. That would be dope as hell if it was in Chile though.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, this is another reason that I think he's so famous, right? Like this ties into it. Is like it's right after World War I ends. So like the world is like devastated and like so many people died and this is like horrible thing. And they like need a hero, right? Like this is like a time for like a narrative to emerge. And he does this experiment in 1919 after the war, the second time the eclipse comes, and they're able to like experimentally confirm that his general theory of relativity is correct and that the sun is bending space-time because it's so gravitationally massive. And it's like on the front page of every paper. It's like Einstein's theory of relativity is correct. Like this is a thing. Like this dude just says like there's no absolute truth in the universe and like it's been scientifically proven. And like this is the moment where like his life goes gangbusters because now he's like a rock star like out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And this so I'm tying this back to what we were saying originally, right? Like so this moment to me is so interesting because you have these like weird moments in science where like one thing happens that like immediately confirms a theory and it's a really big deal. Like you had this with like Isaac Newton, right? So Isaac Newton, like before Isaac Newton, people thought the shit in the sky was like just completely different than things on Earth. Like they called this like, right, like, you know, this word like quintessential, like it's because there was like 4 essences on the Earth, and then like the 5th essence is whatever's in the sky. It's like the queen or like 5, like the 5th essence, right? Yeah. It's like some completely different
like
thing.
that movie The Fifth Element with Bruce Willis.
Yeah, exactly. It's like just like sky and space is just different. Like no one realized that like the same forces that, you know, govern the Earth govern space. Like he's the first person to propose this and no one believed him.
Oh yeah.
And then one of his contemporaries, Edmund Halley, who's like one of his contemporaries at the time, was able to like go through history books and see that like comets that happen throughout history and are written about could actually be the same comet, like using Newton's theory of gravity, just coming back over and over again.
Oh, like Halley's Comet.
Yeah, exactly. So he was actually able to predict the date that this comet would return. And people thought it was like, yeah, like that's, you know, crazy. This guy's predicting a comet like to the T.
Yeah.
And then when it came back, it was like, oh my God, gravity's a thing. But it was like in that one moment where it's like front page, every newspaper, gravity's a thing, confirmed, right?
Yeah.
And like you had this with Einstein where it was like, oh my God, theory of relativity confirmed, as like a new front page headline where like someone's all of a sudden famous. And like we're going back to saying this now is like with this Higgs boson particle that they discovered at the Large Hadron Collider, like they had a moment that was like, oh my God, Higgs boson particle confirmed, like Peter Higgs, who's alive, but like he's like not famous, you know?
Yeah, but then also if you look at that paper, which I think I did once, it has something like 200 people's name on it, whereas like Einstein's paper I guess had one name on it. So it's much easier to become famous if you're the one person whose name is on the paper then.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like the entire team at CERN is probably responsible for discovering this Higgs boson particle. But it's like it's just interesting to me that like this doesn't happen anymore. Like you don't have one scientist that can just have like breakthrough fame with these discoveries, I guess. And I think it's just a tragedy of modern science where like you just can't discover things as an individual anymore. You need like all this crazy tooling and stuff.
Yeah. It's also interesting to me that, so you were talking about Newton before, and I'm also really interested in this guy Leibniz, who like also supposedly invented calculus, and they are always rivals, and how he was such a Renaissance man in the sense that he just knew all kinds of stuff. And I feel like at that time there was less voluminous content for different disciplines, so you could be an expert of many different fields, whereas today there's just so much knowledge about any one field that you could never conceivably read all of it.
Oh, that's interesting. So you think that people specialize more now in general?
Yeah, I think you have to, because there's just too much knowledge about every one discipline.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. But it is interesting, like a lot of innovators are like super cross-disciplinary. Like in this other book that I've been reading about the invention of the microprocessor and integrated circuit, like this guy Jack Kilby that invents the integrated circuit is like, he intentionally like reads everything about everything. Like he'll read about cars and like dentist equipment, and like his whole theory is like you're gonna just need to do like this massive breadth first search of the world and understanding multiple disciplines, and then you go like deep into one thing, and you'll remember something that you learned about this field, and that like gives you this creative insight that people that actually innovate and push things forward use more.
Yeah, like map and then reduce.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think like for innovation, you almost have to do this. Like whoever wrote Bitcoin, for example, is like obviously well versed in economics and like law and computing, and it's this really like weird cross disciplinary thing where you have to.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting. And like that, maybe that's like where the innovation is now. Like you can't do this in science, because science you have to get like way too deep into one specific subject.
Yeah.
But these like like biotech, where it's like or like AI, where it's like kind of more multidisciplinary, is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Or also this guy who invented perceptron algorithm, which is the basis of neural networks, as I recall. He was studying this brain synapses by these Spanish scientists, Ramon and Cajal, and trying to create analogy to this in computers or in math. And so that's how you get weights and like threshold functions and so on. So he took an insight from biology and then applied it to computing. And then in the intersection of these two things was born a new technique for doing AI, which is fascinating.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah, and I think that's probably right. You have to be multidisciplinary to be creative, kind of.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Sean Parker once said this thing that I thought was cool in a book that I read about Napster, which was specialization is for insects.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very much a generalist about things. But anyways, okay, cool. So we're back with Einstein. So after he becomes famous, like one of the first things he does is like go on this world tour. Oh, it's also really interesting too, because like after like this shit's confirmed, he basically is like, all right, I'm gonna win a Nobel Prize at some point. And like he still doesn't have that much money, because he was still like kind of like second tier until this confirmation happens. And he wants to divorce his wife, and he doesn't have any money to give her, so he just makes a contract with her that whenever he wins the Nobel Prize, she just gets the prize money, because apparently you win a lot of money for winning a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, it's like $1 million, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a lot of money. And it was all in Swiss francs. Oh, and this is like fucking right after the Treaty of Versailles, when the German mark gets pounded to oblivion, which is like one of the reasons that like Hitler was able. Yeah, like Hitler's able. So like the fact that they paid out this prize in Swiss francs was like a really big deal. It was like going to be worth a ton of money like for a German citizen. So he like makes a contract with his wife that when he wins the Nobel Prize, she can have all the money if like she agrees to like divorce him and stuff. And like this happens, and like she initially like rejects it, and then she's like, wait, like this is actually gonna be a lot of money, I'm gonna do it. So he goes on like this world tour, which is so crazy, right? Because like this is like in the height of Zionism in Israel. It would also be interesting to do like Herzl as like one of these books also.
Totally interesting.
Yeah, it'd be fucking great. But so he like goes with this dude who might be this Wiseman dude, I don't remember his name, but he goes with some Zionist to the US to go on like this world tour where like this guy that's like a super famous scientist is going to come give talks at like all these universities, but they're also going to collect money for Israel. It's like very like interesting like dynamic, because Einstein was he was kind of like, even he was a pacifist, I guess, but he like also was kind of a Zionist, because he's like, yeah, Jews are like persecuted in Germany, so like they should have a place not to be persecuted. Like makes sense to me. But he wasn't like you know,
and he was a pacifist, but he also supported the war against the Nazis.
Yeah, exactly.
And didn't he also have some trouble getting his entry visa to the United States?
Does he? I don't know. I didn't know that. When he moves there permanently or beforehand?
Yeah, I guess he needed an entry visa to the U.S., right? Like while World War II was like on the cusp.
Oh yeah, probably yeah. But this is, I guess, a little like before Hitler's in power that he does his first world tour in the U.S. So it probably wasn't as big of a deal. But he goes and he's like a rock star, like especially. He like goes to all these universities, and he, like I think like he speaks German. Like I don't think he speaks English at this point. So it's like a really crazy scene of like him like giving these lectures in German and like people trying to translate it. But he like goes and they raise a bunch of money. They come back to the U.S. He does win a Nobel Prize, and then he also like it takes him like 3 years to win a Nobel Prize, which also like he thinks is like people like blocking him for like personal vendettas or whatever, which is funny. So then like when he wins the Nobel Prize, he doesn't show up for the ceremony. He like because he wants to smite them. He's like, "Fuck you guys! You took way too long to give me this." Like,
but so that's interesting idea though that one of my friends was trying to convince me of, which I was reminded when you were saying that he speaks German. So it's interesting that all of these guys, or like very many of them, who have these like breakthrough revolutionary ideas are native German speakers. Like Karl Marx separating workers and like systems of economic development from like the existing paradigm, or like Mendel separating like genes and so on from like development and like realized traits, or Luther separating Christianity from dogma, and Einstein separating mass and energy and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so there's just way more examples even than that. And one of my friends was trying to make the point to me once that this is an artifact of the fact that in German it's really easy to modularize concepts because of the way that the language works. And so it's like a mental like catalyst to thinking about ideas or thinking about concepts in this kind of...
In what sense do you mean it's easy to modularize concepts?
Like the fact that you can create words by just like conjoining different ideas together, you know, like...
Oh, gotcha.
Like they have these big long words,
compound
right?
words.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
So like you can break the compound words apart into their distinct elements or add them together, like Legos or something.
Yeah, where in English is so verbose, you just have to know the different word for something.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of. Oh, that is so interesting. Yeah, I could see there being like validity to this. Oh, okay, cool. Anyway, so where was I in the Einstein story? Oh yeah, so he's in Japan. I think he goes to Asia for like a little bit, and then this is like, so now it's like mid 1920s where like the German economy collapses, right? And like, so I don't know, like Hitler, like I never really understood this because like apparently like I always thought like, so like at the end of World War One, like after like Germany launches this like massive offensive into France and they get stalled out, and like the US has like fully entered the war at this point, and the Allies launch this like major counteroffensive, which looks like something out of World War II, where you have like battalions of each country like marching together, like, and like, you know, artillery fire with like infantry behind it, and they just completely push the Germans back. It's like very obvious the Germans aren't going to win the war. And they like, even when it's very obvious the war is lost, they still hold out for like another 8 months and like lose, you know, like 500,000 Germans or something like this. And it was because like all the generals like didn't want to like accept responsibility. They're like, well, I don't want this to look bad on me when we lose. So like, let me win one more battle real quick. You know, like it was like this really weird politics. And like Hitler writes about this in Mein Kampf when he's like, you know, fuck these, you know, annoying generals that like shed German blood for no reason when they knew the war was lost. But then like, I guess when the economy collapses, he blames the pacifists for it, because it was like, well, screw these pacifists that, you know, agreed to this Treaty of Versailles, which completely bent us over backwards and like collapsed our economy. So I never like really got like which one he was mad at, the people that held out too long or like the people that like surrendered.
Yeah, but actually it's very interesting. I didn't know this until like I was living in Germany and I looked it up, that it was, no one actually like quit the war. There was a kind of communist revolution in Berlin and all over the country. And so like Bavaria split off into this communist like socialist Republic of Bavaria and all that kind of stuff. And then I think it kind of just like kicked over like that.
So it was just consensus, like there's no government to even
surrender. It's so interesting though, right? Because, and then think about the fact also that they won in the East. Like the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Russia was out, they beat Russia.
Yeah.
And then it's so fascinating, right? And then the Turks beat the British at the Battle of Gallipoli, and then they can like start like moving all the forces like over to concentrate on France and England, you know? And like Italy was with them too and so on. It's so fascinating. But then Italy like left twice. They did it in World War I and they did it in World War II.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, so like Hitler's very mad about the pacifists, and like I think that this also gets like tied back to like blaming Jews for things, because they're like, well, who collapsed our economy? It's just easy to say the pacifists and the Jews, and Einstein was a pacifist and a Jew. So he's like in a really bad situation here, and like things start ramping up. I think it's so interesting also, like he had this friend, I don't remember his name, but one of his contemporaries is like assassinated. He's like killed by like the like Hitler's like people that are in, you know, cahoots with the Nazis, and like Hitler praises the assassination. But this dude was like an assimilated person, like he was like a German nationalist. So Einstein,
was it Walter Rathenau?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that Walter Rathenau is killed, and Einstein's friends with him. And he's like, well, that dude was like a nationalist and I'm a pacifist. So
Yeah,
like,
totally. Like, I think this is crazy. Like, also, so I was reading that I think his name is Harry Goldman, like the guy who was running Goldman Sachs at that time in the States. So all of those guys were from Germany. And they
Yeah.
all supported the German Empire against the French and British Empire. And they wouldn't participate in a loan that the U.S. government made to Britain and France, like this armaments.
Oh,
loan or
during World
whatever.
War I?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, like, subsequently, they were barred from, like, all these lucrative government contracts and stuff. I think another prominent bank at that time was, so there was Goldman Sachs, and then there was also Kuhn Loeb, which was a huge bank, but, like, in the 90s got whatever, like, merged or something into oblivion. But like they also wouldn't participate in it, which I always thought was interesting. And it's actually the United States that collapsed the German economy because they gave these loans to Britain and France in the beginning and didn't enter the war for a really long time. Yeah. And then like they only entered the war, I heard, to guarantee their investment because they would have been forfeit those loans if Britain and France had to pay war reparations to Germany. So they helped get their loan back by defeating Germany, and then Britain and France imposed war reparations on Germany. Then the Germans would pay the money.
Sending that to the U.S.
Yeah, and then they sent it back to the United States. And those loans weren't paid off fully from Britain to the U.S. until 2006.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, I think that's so interesting. The idea that like, because at the time of World War One, like there are a significant amount of German immigrants in the U.S. and it's non-obvious if the U.S. were to enter World War One, which side they would even support, because there was so much German like nationalism in the U.S. Which is such an interesting dynamic, like why they chose to support the Allies to begin with. Yeah, there's also this thing like the Zimmerman note. That's what we learned in high school, but I don't know how true it is. It's kind of like BS. Yeah, like it sounds like one of those like BS things, like the Gulf of Tonkin or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the Germans threatened to attack us. It's like, well,
they tried to give Mexico Texas or something like this.
Yeah, if it's like probably like someone did send that to Mexico, but it like wasn't that big of a deal, and they just like made it a big deal because they wanted.
Oh yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin. Yeah, I think it's something like that. Gulf of Tonkin thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so there's this mass exodus, and this is probably like the dumbest thing Germany ever did, which is have all these scientists just mass.
Oh my god, so stupid! I can't like it's just incomprehensibly stupid.
Yeah, that all these like dope ass fucking scientists just all like piece the fuck out, and a lot of them come to the U.S.
Yeah.
And this also
like if you go to Williamsburg, like this acidic area, and then they're literally speaking German. So Yiddish is exactly German language. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Okay, so. The other thing that's interesting is so like Einstein, the 1915 paper is a thing that does like the E equals MC squared thing.
Yeah, I think so.
But the thing that happens like at this time is this is like the starting of like, yo, you might be able to make nuclear bombs.
Oh yeah, this is so fascinating.
Yeah, like so he's not like thinking about nuclear bombs, but he's kind of thinking that this is like a thing, and he's very worried that Hitler is going to create a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, because they were trying.
Yeah. So he like goes to FDR.
Who's
like,
the guy? Wait, there was one German scientist who's still famous today who was leading this whole thing.
Oh, I don't know.
What the hell is his name?
Lawrence? I don't know.
Is it something with an H? It'll come to me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that later. But so he goes to FDR. Like he has a meeting with FDR, and he basically stresses him the importance of beating the Germans to this. And there are people that think that this is the inception of the Manhattan Project. Like, even though Einstein wasn't involved in the Manhattan Project, because I think, like, he got boxed out of it because he's just, like, a little too suspicious. Like, they don't want, like, because I don't know, like, these guys like Oppenheimer and Feynman are Americans.
Yeah.
But, like Fermi worked on the Manhattan Project. He was Italian.
He's Italian, yeah.
So, like, I don't know, like, how, like, Americanized the Manhattan Project was versus, like, using foreign scientists.
But he also, like, knew what they were doing and stuff like that? Because didn't all the guys from the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton, like, go to the Manhattan Project? And, like, Los Alamos and shit?
Probably, but apparently... I don't know. Isaacson made it seem like he was not very involved, but he must have kind of known.
Yeah, of course. I heard. So I think it was in the biography I was reading about Oppenheimer that it was very obvious to everyone that like because like there was all these papers being published that were like touching on the idea of like nuclear weapons and like splitting an atom, and then as soon as like the Manhattan Project starts, no papers are published about this, and they all just close up. So it's like really sketchy.
Yeah. It's also kind of interesting. Like Einstein's interesting in this like second phase of his life because all this like dope shit he was publishing was like before he was 40, right? And he dies when he's like 75.
Oh yeah, and he was like saying something like it's impossible to have original ideas after you turn. Yeah.
So he's like basically between the ages of 40 and 75, when in theory as like a scientist you should like scale up, right? Like you should get better because you have all this knowledge. Like he just doesn't do anything interesting. And it's kind of this interesting dynamic because he ran into this resistance with this theory of relativity against like the establishment, so to speak. But the new thing after his theory was this idea of quantum mechanics.
Yeah, and he was the establishment against that.
Right, exactly. And there's all these like dope scientists like Heisenberg and Schrodinger.
Heisenberg, that's the guy.
Oh yeah, he made the German nuclear program.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's dope. Yeah, but it's like Heisenberg and Schrodinger and like there's all these like freaking dope new age scientists that are all into quantum mechanics, and he's like, you guys are just silly, and like he's the establishment like contesting against them, which is so interesting. But yeah, like he goes to like all these conferences and just like for the last 30 years of his life is just like the old guy that is wrong about everything, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But he becomes like way more into politics because he's like this international celebrity because of all this stuff that happened earlier.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of essays about pacifism and stuff, right? I think I read one of them.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, it's so, man, he's so interesting. So he just, like he settles down in the U.S. and then eventually he does, like his family drama continues. And the final girl that he meets is like this girl that lives on the Long Island, I think, that is literally a Russian spy, right?
Yeah.
Which is crazy. He's just like, you know.
It's like that movie Red Sparrow.
Well, yeah, or the Americans or something. Because
Yeah.
the Russians literally did steal the nuclear plans from the U.S.
So this is fascinating, actually, the way that it happened. It was this guy, Klaus Fuchs, and I read a book about him. It's so fascinating, his life. So, like, he was a German communist, you know? And then, like, World War II happens, and they all had the idea that communism was going to be a global phenomenon. Like, Lenin had this idea, too, that, like, you know, the communist revolution was going to start in Russia, and then, like, all of these scientists, or all these, like, thinkers, like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht in Germany were going to, like, facilitate a people's revolution in, like, a more industrialized country, which is, like, where communism was supposed to happen, because Russia was kind of a backwater and, like, an agrarian economy at that time. And so, like, didn't have the factories and proletariat that, like, they had in England and in Germany and so on. And then so their idea was, like, it would start in Russia, then it would come to Germany, and then come to England, and, like, come to France and Italy. And then, like, we would have, like, this global communist, like, government system somehow. And so Klaus Fuchs, like, thought that he was just helping out this movement. And it's so fascinating. Like, he was giving these secrets, like, of the status of the Manhattan Project to these Russian spies, and, like, went through a lot of trouble to, like, get their contact information and everything. And then later, when he was living in, I think, England, and he saw all this bad stuff that Stalin was doing, he felt so bad that he turned himself in and, like, confessed to all this stuff. But it was also...
Does he get executed?
I think he went to jail for the rest of his life or something, but it was happening also concurrently with the United States government was logging all of the communiques between the Russian embassy and Moscow, although they were encrypted, but they broke the encryption. And it didn't happen until, like, the 70s or something, or, like, the 60s.
Oh, like they had this just on ice.
Yeah, they just kept it a really long time. Because isn't it something like, if you just keep trying it over and over and over, or, like, computers get faster and stuff, so then finally we're able to, like, get these keys and then decrypt the messages. So they were, like, reading through it, and it's, like, coming at him from that way, but then he's also, like, feeling bad, so it's, like...
Oh, it's kind of interesting, yeah.
It's
also interesting that, like, J. Edgar... So, like, Einstein dies in, like, 1955, I think. But, like, McCarthyism, like, starts in, like, 1950. And McCarthyism's crazy. I also, like, want to read more about it, but...
It's also... Oh, sorry.
I was going to say... What were you going to say?
Well, McCarthyism's somehow also interesting because it's sort of related to that book, The Patriarch, too, and JFK, because, like, Kennedy was an Irish Catholic, and so was McCarthy. Yeah. And they were, like, friends because of this. Like, who's the patriarch about? What's his name?
Joseph P. Kennedy.
Yeah, Joseph Patrick Kennedy. He and McCarthy were friends. And, like, he supported his political campaigns and stuff. And they, like, were boys with the Pope and stuff.
Yeah, crazy. But, what I was going to say is, during this McCarthyism, is like as J. Edgar Hoover is, like, becoming insanely powerful at the FBI. And J. Edgar Hoover is so interesting. But he is just crazy. And he starts spying on Einstein, like, seriously. Because he's, like, very suspicious of him. And... like his files on Einstein are, like, now public, and it's so funny because he's wrong about everything. Like, everything they have on Einstein's file, like Walter Isaacson saying, is just, like, not true, as I've explained. And literally missing is the fact that he's literally dating a Russian spy. Yeah, like, it's just not on the files at all. It's just, oh my god, it's ridiculous. It's a crazy story, and then he dies, and then there's a fucking crazy anecdote about the coroner when Einstein dies. Takes his brain and steals it.
Stupid.
Yeah, he steals it, just, like, goes around, like, selling pieces of it to researchers for weird. Like, the last, like, 20 years, and then eventually, like, gave it back because he's like, now I'm, like, 80 and I'm gonna die. Here's that. Oh my god, what a ridiculous story. It's it's interesting, and I think like reading the book definitely gives me like I said like color into like why he's so famous and like kind of
Yeah, I never thought about that.
this last like bastion of like scientific like heroism where you're like a famous scientist. Like it's really you don't really know many famous scientists nowadays. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Also, J. Craig Venter, you know the guy who cloned this C. elegans bacteria or whatever.
No.
It's like the first clone or something like that. He also has like a kind of hero story myth like this. He was a surgeon in Vietnam or something like that before he became a scientist. But he also has this like first name initial dot middle name last name.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And that was another reason why it was part of like the whole cumulative process of
just find really powerful people and notice that they all do first initial middle name.
No,
Yeah.
just like I don't know, just really interesting people. Like I was really into science for a while.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so that's Einstein. We can move on to Moonwalking with Einstein.
Okay, but let's take a quick commercial break.
All right, sure.
Because
All right, cool. As I was saying, okay. Yo, why don't people write manifestos anymore? Because we were just saying that like the Communist Manifesto and the Zionist Manifesto are like written in the same year.
Is it though? Maybe. Or anyway,
or like
in
whatever,
close
like
proximity
they're
to each
close
other.
proximity,
Yeah,
and they were
yeah.
both like massively influential. And like Common Sense by Thomas Paine is written like it's like 8 pages, and it like inspired people to join the American Revolution and things.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, why were you saying people don't write them anymore?
I think that so if you read Das Kapital and then you read the Communist Manifesto is like Das Kapital for Dummies, and it's like a very brief cliff notes of it. And then I also read a book I really, really like once, which is I think it's called 8 Days That Changed the World or Shook the World or something like that. And it's by this American journalist who was living in Russia at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution. And he was going around the country trying to explain communism to like proletarian workers at this time. And the thing is that they're just so uneducated. They don't have the ideological hooks to just even think coherently about this. So you can't explain the ideas of Das Kapital, which are pretty complicated, to someone who just doesn't have the like requisite understanding. Yeah. And so like they needed like literally Das Kapital for Dummies. I mean, I don't know much about this Thomas Paine one, but it's probably something similar.
Oh, interesting. But I just feel like it's so much easier to make something viral if it's a manifesto than a book. Like books aren't viral, you know?
Yeah.
Manifestos could easily be viral. Like this Google manifesto that this dude wrote. It's like 10 pages long, but it like went viral, right?
Yeah.
If he wrote a book about it, no one would care.
Yeah.
You know?
True.
I feel like manifestos are just so underrated. Okay, anyway. Well, speaking of American journalists, as you mentioned, here, watch this segue. Okay. We're going to talk about the next book, which was Moonwalking with Einstein.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, right? Which actually has nothing to do with Albert Einstein. It just happens to have the same name, and I found them on Audible together. So.
Oh, yeah, because of it was one of his memory palace hooks.
Yeah. So anyway, Moonwalking with Einstein is a story by this guy named Joshua Foer, who is, I think that's his name, right? Joshua Foer? And now I feel bad because I don't even remember the name of the author.
Could be. I have no idea. While you're telling it, I'm
going to get this right.
Okay. So he's a journalist who
I was right. It's Joshua Foer.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, but what I like about it is he kind of was following this idea of Malcolm Gladwell that you can do anything you put your mind to if you practice it for like 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
And he did that and won this memory competition.
Yeah. Okay. So the story is this guy, Joshua Foer, and this was an awesome book. It's a really short read. It's just a really light read and it's really good. But he is a journalist for Slate.com, which is also fascinating to me because it's like Slate.com you think of as like this like trashy like clickbait outlet, but like back when he wrote this book, it was probably like legitimate journalistic, like they probably published like interesting stuff.
Also, he just graduated from college, so he was like living in his parents' basement, I think.
Yeah. Yo, I have a theory about this too. Like, so like all these. Well, Slate's interesting because like there's like kind of like 2 waves of like the liberal blogosphere that emerged. Like the first wave was after the Clinton impeachment trial, when like Matt Drudge is like basically hammering Bill Clinton with his like online blog, and the Clintons are like, all right, we can't let this happen. Like we need our own media outlets, and like Slate's one of those like OG things that come to just like push like establishment viewpoints or whatever. But then you have like the second wave of like Huffington Post and stuff that comes like in opposition to the Iraq War, but like. You have this like massive like entity that's kind of like devolved into like clickbait nonsense right now. And my theory about this is that it's because there's like no pay, there's no business model for journalism anymore. So like the only people that like write like articles at these things are like people that do it for like idealistic reasons. Because like they're basically told like there's no business model, you're not gonna make any money, and you're like it's gonna suck. And they're like, well, I can make a difference though, so I'm gonna do it. So like the only people that do this now are like people that like want to make a difference with their voice, and they tend to be like more activist than like journalist.
Yeah.
Whereas like back in the day, like writing online was like cool, and if you were like into journalism and telling stories, you would do it and like get paid a salary and stuff.
Like Andrew Breitbart was just like delivering pizzas, and then he like got into conservative media because he had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also Righteous Indignation is the biography of Andrew Breitbart, autobiography. That's fucking awesome. It's like one of my favorite books. But all right, anyway. So anyway, he enters like he covers this story. So like he's not in like a memory competition. He covers it for Slate. And he goes to this like really obscure event, which is like the U.S. Memory Championships, which is, oh God, like I love that stuff like this exists, by the way. It's just like, it started as like an idea in his head. He's like, I wonder who the smartest person in the U.S. is. And like somehow this like led him to this memory championship. And like the whole thing is like, who can like remember the most stuff? So like, it sounds like ridiculous on the surface because it's like, okay, who can memorize a deck of cards the fastest? And
Yeah,
things,
literally random bullshit like numbers of pi.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and like faces, they have a game called like Faces where they show you a face and then someone's name. And then like they just do like hundreds of these and then they like show you a face and go, what's this person's name?
Really
that's like
good
one of
trick.
that's one of the competitions. Yo, and apparently like this becomes like a thing in the story when he goes to like the European Championships. Where Americans are better at this because like America has like people from all ethnicities.
Interesting.
Where like so like if you meet someone like Vignesh, as the face, you know that name. You're like, oh, some Indian dude named Vignesh. But like if you're like live somewhere where there's no Indian people, then you'll be like, what the fuck is it's just like some random characters. So apparently like, Americans are dope at the face memory competition. But anyway,
interesting.
So he goes to this competition, and like it sounds ridiculous on the surface, but there's actually like. So like he covers it and it is kind of ridiculous, but then he like goes and hangs out with all these dudes that competed in it. And there actually like is kind of a deeper meaning to it, which is kind of fascinating. So like there's like this trope, right, of like something being a lost art, like the lost art of concentration or whatever, right? But like memory like legitimately is a freaking lost art.
Totally.
Because like before the printing press, like if you ever wanted to like transmit information, you had to memorize it. Like you'd go to the library where the one book existed. And then you'd have to memorize it if you wanted to tell people about it.
Yeah.
And then like after the printing press, it doesn't matter because you can just like print a million of the books. And so basically like 1600s on, like people don't really care that much about memorizing stuff. But back before that, it used to be a really big deal. And it's kind of like going on this idea we were talking about earlier about why Einstein is so famous. Like there's all these people from like ancient history that you know, and you don't really understand why they're famous. And like you realize reading this book, it's because of their memory, which is so fascinating. Like you hear this guy like Cicero is just well known. Like we know Cicero. Why? Oh, he's like some orator in Rome. Like I don't know what that means. Like why do we care about some orator in Rome? Why was he famous? Well, it's because he was fucking dope at memorizing shit. Like he would go to the library and like memorize all these books and then like give sermons where he's like referencing knowledge that how would anyone ever get this knowledge? You know, like you had to like have dope memory techniques. So like all the memory techniques that he's going to learn about in this book are all from people like in Rome and Greece, which is so fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like
even in your own life, like think about how many phone numbers you used to know. Just memorize them. Now I only know one or two.
Yeah, I can only tell phone numbers. There's my friends from like AOL Instant Messenger that put them in their away messages because you'd like see them all the time. Yeah. But anyway, so he goes and talks to these guys and they're talking about like this really deep idea of like why memory is so important. Like there's this one dude that has a theory that I thought was interesting, which was like the way that you perceive the passage of time is by the number of discrete events in your life. So like how like when you say like wow that day flew by, it's because like nothing happened. But like, oh my God, this week took forever. It's because like so many different things happen, right? Like you have so many discrete events and then the delta between them is like really short. So you perceive that as taking longer. So this guy is like, okay, I can make time slow down and my life seem like I'm living longer if I just remember more stuff, you know, because then there's more discrete events like in history. Like, so he has like this like deep like meaning for why he's doing all this stuff.
I like it.
You also have guys that are like,
like fake savants. And they like LARP that they're savants, but they're not.
So like they say,
oh, and he went on this whole tangent about savant and how savant used to be a good word and now it's like a bad word.
Yeah,
it means you're like semi-autistic or something.
But yeah, it's funny. Like he meets this dude who's like reminds me of like Tony Robbins. Like he's some like huckster, you know, like that's just like selling. Oh my god, like I have a great memory, and like I can teach you how to do it at seminars.
But he's like faking it, right?
Yeah, and it's like he's like born a genius, but he just like does these memory tricks.
Also, I was so fascinated. Okay, so clearly part of the book is just he fucking hates this guy, and he dedicates like an entire chapter to just talking shit about this dude. It's so funny because I remember I was reading the book and I was just thinking about like, so he must be writing this like, I'm totally gonna stick it to this asshole. Fuck this guy. Yeah. Like so many people are gonna buy this book and everyone's gonna hate him.
Yeah.
Like, what's up?
But anyway, so what ends up happening is he just like out of curiosity of like meeting all these people and learning about memory and this like crazy world decides like, as like you were saying, this Malcolm Gladwell immersion of, all right, I'm just going to train under the tutelage of this guy that's like a memory champion. And I'm going to compete in next year's USA Memory Championship.
Yep.
And like he like talks to like scientists and they're going to do like a study on him on whether or not you can like actually.
Is it the USA one? I thought he did the world one.
Well, he does. Eventually he does. Yeah. But he starts with just the USA Championship.
Okay. And and he does bad in it, right? Or
no, he wins.
Didn't he win the world one though?
No, he loses the world one.
Oh, okay.
Yo, so this is another thing that was interesting. So at the time that he's doing this, like the USA Memory Championships are like considered a joke.
Yeah.
And it's like the Germans are obviously like the best people at this.
Or isn't it like, I don't know. Yeah. But in Europe, they're much better.
Yeah, they're so much better in Europe than the US, which is so weird. But you know what's also interesting is that I feel like I know these people. You know, because like if you work as a computer programmer, which you know, like I have been for like the last like 6 years, you meet people that just have all these weird theories of like, oh my god, I make all these macros in Vim because if I can save like 5 keystrokes a day, that saves me like 100 minutes like a year, and these people sound exactly like that with these like weird obscure theories of like why memory is so important.
That's an interesting point. I'm literally gonna go home and make a bunch of Vim macros.
Right, yeah, because think about how many keys you type, and if you can just optimize it by 5%, Matt.
Yeah.
Think about what that does for you. So this is definitely my world. But anyway, so he trains as memory, and like the whole idea of like how to improve your memory is, well, one, you're just like really conscious of it, but it's also like people remember, they don't remember like words, but they remember like images. So it's like converting words to images, and then it's like you have this like idea of like a memory palace, which is when you take a location that you know really well, like your office or the house that you grew up in.
Yeah.
And when you want to memorize things in sequence, you make like mnemonic things. So like one of the tasks in this memory challenge is you have to memorize a deck of cards. So one thing you can do is like make each card into an image. So like for example, like Albert Einstein is one of the cards.
Yeah.
And like moonwalking means like 40 or something. So like if you see Einstein moonwalking, it means like that card is 40th. And then you put it in a room like in your house or something.
Yeah. And then you like walk through the house. And
exactly.
It's so interesting.
You take like the one path you would, like starting on your driveway, you look in the mailbox, what's in the mailbox. And like you would remember like kind of what you put in the mailbox, right?
Because people have good spatial memory because our memories evolved for like space, and not for like just abstract shit. Yeah, and then also something I thought was interesting was that you remember it better if it's like weirdly sexually explicit or just bizarre. So I remember he said like all this weird things like with his mom and stuff like this, what he was putting in the house, and like that the number 8 was like a well-endowed woman. And like the number 5 was just a really fat dude.
It's like the more sexual and ridiculous it is, the more memorable it is. So like all their mnemonics are like this crazy stuff. Anyway, so he does this competition. Oh, I was gonna say like also like I think about this too because I've noticed by like when you take drugs, it like fucks with your memory. Like if you smoke a lot of weed, like it fucks with your short-term memory. But I have this theory now after reading this book that I can actually make that like memory loss like mitigated by like improving the way that I remember things, because it's kind of like this interesting idea where it's like you're gonna degrade the hardware by like burning brain cells or whatever, but you're gonna optimize the software by like running it more efficiently, like using these memory techniques. So maybe the performance is not as bad overall. I don't know if this is a good theory or not.
And then also,
I'm still testing this for the listeners.
I think also that smoking weed can somehow like reveal things from like your subconscious mind to you, or just
no, that's definitely true. So when you like take drugs, it's a different search algorithm. So it's like the brain, right? Like you don't know, like it is kind of a computer, right? But you can't remember everything. But it's unknown like if whether or not that's because of the like hard drive space, like can you actually not remember everything, Or do you just like cache it in such a way that like the algorithm you use to access it is like too inefficient to ever return in your lifetime?
And also think about the crazy query language that you use to like issue requests on the brain database. Like before, when I was trying to remember that German scientist, I was like Heisinger, Heidegger, like all this kind of stuff.
Clearly you never watched Breaking Bad.
Yeah. That's he has the same name as that.
Yeah. Which is also like really funny that like Heisenberg is like famous now, but only because of Breaking Bad. Like, no one knows him as a scientist. But so I think that is actually a really interesting idea, that like memory might even be like more capacious than we like realize, but the algorithms we use are just really inefficient to access them. But like drugs definitely change the algorithms, so it's like super interesting because you access information that like you had but like wouldn't have access normally. This is really fascinating. But what was my point? Oh yeah, so I was thinking I lost
too much weed smoking.
I know, seriously. Okay, anyways, so he goes to this competition and okay, I remember the point that I was going to make. So I think about this as like something that you can do to just optimize your to keep your performance of like your brain consistent over time, like as you degrade the hardware. But that's like also a thing with aging, right? Like naturally, like your hardware is going to get degraded from aging.
Yeah, like old people.
So you can you can make the process of like aging like better by optimizing your memory techniques, which is kind of interesting. And he also talks about this, like people perceive the passage of time as faster when you age. Like time goes faster as you get older. Yeah. This is like a known thing. If you ask anyone that's like over the age of 50, they'll tell you that time goes faster as you get older.
Yeah, for sure.
And the reason is like because what he was saying about like the number of discrete events is like basically when you're young, your life's very dynamic. You like live in a bunch of different cities and you meet a lot of different people. But then eventually like you marry a girl and like you settle down and like you work at the same job for multiple years and like you have like this routine. And like when you have routine, time goes faster because there's less discrete events. It's like all the same. It all like blends together. So like I think that that's kind of an interesting idea too, that like just by optimizing your memory, you can make that process like more malleable, I guess.
Yeah.
Palatable was the word I was going for.
I also think about the fact that like, so when you're 1 year old, a year that passes, you have like this compared to your whole life. But then when you're like 100 years old, it's like only 1/100th of that. So it passes much more quickly, like relative to this backlog of experience that you have.
Oh yeah. So it's like this is just 1/100th of my life. It's not a piece when it's
exactly.
Like, that makes total sense. So anyway, this guy he does this training and he like learns all these techniques and it's interesting to hear him describe it. And then he goes to the U.S. Memory Championships and it's so fucking crazy. Okay, what's that like crazy TV channel that like Mark Cuban bought? I forget the name of it.
8.
No, it wasn't. But it's like something like this. Like frick, I don't remember the name of it. But anyway, there was some TV channel that Mark Cuban bought and then he tried to like make it into like this weird like alt sports channel. And anyway, they broadcast this memory competition on it. And oh man, it's so funny because it's like because they were like he goes to this memory championship, but they're producing it for TV. So they have like all these weird events that are supposed to be like more TV friendly. And anyway, because of like the way that they did these events, he ends up winning the memory competition. And then he like also like set a world record at like memorizing a deck of cards. He memorized it in like 1 minute and 40 seconds. I guess it was the USA record or something. So anyway, this journalist that's covering the story goes to the event and wins. Like he wins the US Memory Championships, which is crazy. So then he gets to go to the World Championships, which are in like Germany or something.
Yeah.
And then he goes and gets destroyed because I guess they're much better at memorizing things, which is also like kind of funny, right? Because we're talking about Germany like way before this. But and I wanted to go. Oh my god! So this is still a thing, by the way. They still have these memory championships. I feel like it'd be awesome to go to one of them.
Yeah, it would be cool.
But I think they just had it. It was in like Hong Kong, I think. It was somewhere in China. But oh man, it'd be so interesting to go to. But anyway, yeah. So. Do you have anything else to say about this book? I thought it was super interesting. Read. It's really fast.
Yeah. I really liked it. And I think the concepts in it are useful to your life in general because they're really approachable. Like, you can put them into practice easily. And it's also a very inspiring story because I like stories where people validate this hypothesis of this kind of 10,000 hours rule or whatever, because I'm a firm believer that the idea that geniuses are made and not born, and that like no one, so like even Mozart like was playing piano since he was like 7 or something, and like, I think that people tend to put on a pedestal, like, people who are extremely good at something and attribute it to something, like, beyond normal capability. But then I really like that this book is just like a guy who was super determined, and then he prevailed in some respect. I mean, he didn't win the world one, but he won the U.S. one.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So I thought it was really inspiring and a good book.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I agree with that hypothesis too. I think that people tend to underestimate the extent to which things are achievable because they don't like, it's like the Einstein theory, right? Where it's they don't understand the extent to which things are relative to the field that you're in. So like if you see someone that's like really good at playing guitar, for example, you'll be like, oh man, I pick up a guitar and I suck. Like they're like 100x better than me. And then if you compare that to your normal life where you have some linear growth curve where it's like I'm working on, you know, becoming a better lawyer, and like I notice people in my law firm are like 2x better than me if they've been working for 2 years. So like the fact they look at someone at guitar that's way better than them, like in incomprehensible ways, and they're like, well, that's just because they're way better than me and some natural talent that I don't have. But they don't realize that just like a field like playing guitar is different than a field like being a lawyer. Like there's something, you know, relative to the field that affects the growth curves of it. And if you just put in the work at like playing guitar, for example, you could just get that good. And I think people tend to attribute that to personal competences, I guess, as opposed to like innate natures of the field, because people don't think in that way, but that's actually the way the world works. And because of that, like you said, like people just don't realize that the way you can just like be good at stuff. Like, if you just work at it. It's yeah. Anyway, all right, cool. We can move on to the last book, which is Civilian Warriors by Eric Prince, I want to say. This book was awesome also.
Yeah,
We're reading good stuff right now.
Yeah. My favorite part of this book was when he introduces the concept of mercenary soldiers in the United States.
Well, we should say what it's about first, I guess. Just the real quick example is this is Eric Prince is the guy that started Blackwater, and it's his just kind of like autobiography of the rise and fall of Blackwater, I guess.
Yeah,
so go ahead with what you're
telling
saying.
his side of the story, because like he was defamed in the media and stuff and felt that he didn't get a fair trial.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is so interesting. Finish what you were saying first, and then I'm gonna go on this tangent.
Yeah, sure. So okay, I liked how he introduced Blackwater in the context of the United States using mercenary soldiers all throughout history. So from the Revolutionary War into like the present day, like consistently always has mercenary soldiers in every important like military conflict. And so one good example of this is this bridge between Brooklyn and Queens, which is named after Thaddeus Kosciuszko, I think is his name, a kind of Polish mercenary soldier who came to the United States and helped fight on the side of the U.S. government against the British. And it's just also fascinating in this idea of like, so that Clausewitz book, he's also talking about the fact that if you have an army and you're not engaged in any war for a really long time, then people lose the idea of what it's kind of like to be in a war, and then just the preparedness suffers and all this stuff. So it's really useful for you, if you have a military, to send some soldiers out into the world to like engage in other conflicts, and then they can come back and bring those experiences with them and then teach it to their like people under their command and stuff, and this experience rubs off on them.
Dude, that's so crazy. So I'm still working through that Krupp book, but something so crazy is like they're fighting this war in Germany, like between Germany and Napoleon, and like General Burnside, like Ambrose Burnside, I think is his name. He's like the general in the Civil War in the U.S. Is just over there like studying the war as it's going on. It's like that's what they used to do. They just send generals to like go watch wars in Europe and then go back to the U.S. and like annotate their techniques. And
they still do it.
Yeah.
Like in Iraq, they have all of those like soldiers from like Chile, Spain, Mexico, and so on that like go and participate in this coalition. And I was always wondering like, why the hell did they do that? Yeah. And now I think that's the reason why.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like that thing. Like there's one chapter in this book where he talks about the history of U.S. using foreign contractors like to participate in wars, and it's really well done. It's really fascinating. The point I was going to hit on originally was that, okay, so like I did not know anything about Blackwater before I read this book, except for one thing, that it was bad. And it's so interesting how that happens, right? Yeah. It's like I literally could not have told you one thing about this company other than that it was bad. And it's like, God, you got to get out of the bubble sometimes. But yeah, like there is this like way that the media just does this to you, where like they don't give you information, but they give you like emotional attachments to things.
Yeah.
Where like you know what's good and bad, but you can't like actually like articulate positions on things.
Interesting.
But anyway, so something else that I thought was interesting in this book is it's very rare, I think, to read a book that is pro-military industrial complex. Like I can't think of another time I've ever done it, right? Like I read these like books by like what is his name, Jeremy Scahill, about like the drone program, and it's like scathing, right? It's like exposing the government drone program. Like how often do you read a book that's like, yo, this is like how like the military industrial complex like did good stuff.
Works and how it works.
Like, it's really interesting. But anyway, the whole idea of Blackwater, I guess, is that so I guess this guy's dad was like really famous in Michigan.
Yeah, he like was manufacturing automotive components for GE and Ford and stuff like that.
Yeah, so he had a massive plant and like had a company that had a lot of employees, and he learned like a lot of, you know, business stuff. But his dad was like also working for the military for sure.
For sure, because I think those companies manufacture like tanks and all stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So he like classic military contractor. You pay tax dollars to the government. The government needs tanks. They pay it to this guy.
Yeah.
This is how this stuff works. But so he knew about the military. He knew about business through his dad. He becomes a Navy SEAL, which is fucking dope. And like there's like the whole anecdote of like being a Navy SEAL is like awesome, and anyone that can do it is like a badass in my book. So like I think his dad thought the same way, where like he was like very wealthy, so his dad like there's this whole thing about his inheritance, whatever. And like once his son becomes a Navy SEAL, he's like, all right, you can just have your share of the inheritance. I know if you became a Navy SEAL, you're not going to do something stupid with it.
Yep.
And through his process of becoming a Navy SEAL, I think that he realizes like the training facilities are like lacking. And he creates this like massive training facility for just like training Navy SEALs and whatever, and like keep like making gun ranges and things like this. And it was also like dope because like I had this idea in reading it that I think that it's really cool to have startups that involve physical space, because I just like businesses like this that involve like taking a piece of land and like turning that into the business. Because like I think in terms of like computers and pixels, but it's like very like different to think about businesses that involve just taking pieces of land and turning it into a startup, which is what Blackwater will become. So he makes this like badass training range for just Navy SEALs, and it's like a good business. He's like building like a Rolodex of, you know, people that are just keeping their skills sharp, whether they're in the army or out of the army.
And corporate events, you can just go there and fire a bunch of rocket launchers. Yeah.
And like apparently it's like a dope training facility. They build like a good reputation. And then Columbine happens.
Oh,
yeah. So then Columbine happens, and you know, Columbine is this like horrible tragedy where these two kids shot up a school in Colorado, and the police were completely unprepared for dealing with this. And while the kids are like holding kids hostage in the library, like, you know, making demands and stuff, they're just like chilling outside the building, not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
So it became like, I mean, obviously Columbine. I mean, like, I feel like I've read like 5 books where Columbine is like a major plot point.
Yeah.
Because like it has so many different effects on society, like right, Masters of Doom, like because Masters of Doom is one of my favorite books, also about John Carmack and John Romero and how they created PC gaming. But one of the videos that these guys that shot up Columbine released, they say like it's going to be just like Doom. So then there's like this massive like backlash against people that make these violent video games and things like this. It's also obviously like the gun issue became like really big after Columbine. But something else that was really interesting that I didn't know about was that a major plot point that happens in America is that this police preparedness issue became like a big issue too, where they're like, the police did not handle this correctly. So we need to train every police force to deal with something like this. Okay, so where are you going to train every police force? Oh, how about this guy that has this dope military training facility?
Yeah, also, so the reason why I kind of busted out laughing when you said Columbine, although Columbine is decidedly unfunny, was that they created this totally ridiculous sounding like high school, and they gave it the craziest name. Do you remember what it was called?
Oh, yeah, preparedness high or whatever.
Yeah, it was something ridiculous that. And then it was just this super insane high school where they hired actors and stuff, and then they gave all these police that they were training guns and just let them loose in this psycho like laser tag from hell.
Oh, it's like Never Again High. Yeah, it was a really fun name. It was a funny name. But anyway, so Blackwater makes this like fake high school to train every police force in the country. I guess they're not Blackwater at the time. No, maybe they are at the time. I don't remember. But they make this crazy high school, and they get a contract with like every police force in the country to like come like twice a year kind of thing. And it just is a massive influx of revenue. And a lot of these police officers are ex-military guys also. So they're just building this like crazy Rolodex of contacts of people in the law enforcement military space. And I forget how they initially get their first like military contract.
The targets. I remember like they were struggling and then they made these really dope targets and they started selling those or something.
Oh, for like people to do these like crazy sniper things or whatever. But anyway, I forget what it is, but there's some political reason why it becomes so like this is during
the Cole, the USS Cole, right?
Oh yes, that's it. Fuck yeah. Oh, nice. So yeah, that was another terrorist attack in the Gulf of Aden, right?
Yeah.
Like off the coast of Yemen,
Exactly.
where like a U.S. naval ship was like
Some
torpedoed.
Dude, like, no, I think he
he
drove a goddamn Boston
Yeah.
whaler with a bunch of C4 into the side of a boat
Yeah,
or something. It's just so ridiculous.
And blew it up, and it was a horrible terrorist attack.
Yeah,
and then they start training like the U.S. military again, like they do like preparedness for naval ships.
Yeah, they
at
built
Blackwater.
a ship. Yeah, so they built the crazy high
Yeah,
school,
yeah.
then they built a ship.
Yeah.
Out of like cargo containers.
Yeah.
And then like made this whole yeah, it's crazy.
So they're training all these military forces about preparedness, and they're building up this serious Rolodex of contacts in the army industry. And okay, so this is during the Iraq War, or I guess the aftermath. The Iraq War like was very quick, where we took to Baghdad in like a week or something.
Yeah.
But then there's like this massive rebuilding project that involves having a lot of U.S. diplomats or just like diplomats that are high profile targets driving through dangerous areas where like people want to kill them and stuff like this. And somehow Blackwater like flips into from just doing this training to actually putting people from their Rolodex into Iraq as private security detail. And this is, I forget exactly the way that it transitions, but
it started slowly somehow. Like they started buying these helicopters and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like they had helicopters for training that they like leased to the military or something.
Oh yeah, didn't they like ask them or like he donated them or something like this?
Yeah, and also like the military has all these fucking stupid rules, like, or maybe they're not stupid, but they kind of are, where it's like, well, you can't use any vehicle in the field that's not made in America. So it's like, oh wow, well this manufacturing plant in Wisconsin is making your like our bulletproof limousine. It's like, well, I have a mission tomorrow. I need a bulletproof limousine. Yeah. And like Blackwater's like, yo, we just have bulletproof Toyotas if you want to just use those. You know, like, because we're not the military, we're a private company.
Yeah.
So like they just like start like supplying like people in Iraq with like things, and eventually it goes into security detail. So like this gets so interesting because it's like I'm very much on the side of Blackwater in this specific instance, which is what are you looking for? Oh,
can I get that jewel?
Oh, yeah, the jewel. I was going to say, I'm very, very much on the side of Blackwater in this instance that, like, I don't, like, if you're just providing security detail for a diplomat, like, I don't get why that can't be a private company. Like why that's a big deal. It doesn't make any difference to me. But, oh, man, so they start doing security for, like, high-profile assets. And I think it's just because they can do it cheaper and more efficiently and don't have to deal with the fucking government bureaucracy.
Like SpaceX.
Exactly. Or like, what was I going to say? Like Palantir, maybe.
Exactly.
I don't know that yet, but, or like, even like these private, like this whole issue about like private prisons now, where like if you talk to like any politician, they'll be like, it's just because they're cheaper and more efficient for doing the exact same thing. It's not like, but then, like the other side of that argument is like, well, it's unethical to make money off of prisons. Like, all right.
Like, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. But anyway,
but I guess that's something also that's been going back like thousands of years, like employing like prisoners and making them do work. Like, don't they make the license plates? Or is that like a meme that is
I have no idea if that's actually true or not, but it'd be interesting to know. But anyway, so it was so interesting. Like, so his point though is that what he did in Iraq was not mercenaries, right? Because like the idea of like mercenaries is that it's a foreign citizen.
Oh, actually, it's like even a legal term, right? If you say mercenary, then it's like one category.
You're talking that you're like a foreign citizen entering into like a war.
It's the Geneva Convention
on the side of another country, right?
Yeah. The Geneva Convention, this thing is like against mercenaries. Oh, and it doesn't provide them the same protection or blah, blah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like defined in the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But what he was saying is that Blackwater, they were providing Americans, mostly. I mean, there are probably some people that weren't American, but they were providing Americans to provide security detail. Right, they weren't fighting in a war, and they're all like ex-U.S. military people anyway.
Yeah.
And they were doing a better job in the military. Like,
or there was one very fascinating anecdote he told, which was that, There was some situation where like the Spanish contingent of troops was supposed to guard some facility in some capacity, but there was like some kind of political domestic pressure in Spain that they had to withdraw them, or they just didn't do it. And so this guy was totally screwed, and they went and like saved some dudes, like airlifted them from a helicopter like off the roof of a building while they were taking like oncoming enemy fire from this like Modi army or something like this. One of these like rebel, or you could say, I don't know, just militias in Iraq. And yeah, it was fascinating because the general whose troops he saved in this got really pissed off. So first he was saying he was thankful, then like it was political backlash from it because it made the general look stupid and unprepared. So then he started like throwing them under the bus. Yeah, that was interesting. And like a lot of the book I thought was fascinating was he was trying to exculpate himself from all these situations where he was made to look like an asshole in the press because at the time he had some kind of gag order. He couldn't say anything.
He was working with the CIA.
Yeah.
So like he just can't say anything about anything he's doing, and he just got like dragged through this, as Andrew Breitbart would say, like the Democratic Party is the media. Like that's like one of his famous quotes. But he's like pro military industrial complex was seen as like, I guess, like a more red tribe issue. So like I feel like people just needed a scapegoat for the Iraq War because it was such a disaster. And like, when it came out, it's like, hey, who's this company providing like private contractors to Iraq? Like, let's just fucking drag them through the mud.
Yeah, but also I think that the guy himself is kind of an asshole and kind of like a lightning rod and kind of reveled in that attention.
Yeah.
And at the same time, for instance, he went and gave these depositions to Congress and stuff like this and was answering questions about his campaign contributions to Republican candidates and just openly advocating for Republican congressmen and stuff like this and like the Republican establishment. And so I feel like, so it was interesting to me to learn at the end of the book that this same company now continues to work, doing the same exact things, just but with a different name and under a different leader. So basically, he's trying to say, like, that, this great company that he made was destroyed, but actually it was only destroyed because all they had to do was cut his head off and then replace the head with somebody else. So
what's so interesting is that, so I guess Blackwater, there's a couple things that come up, but one is they have some mission go really wrong where I guess like 4 people die and it just becomes a fiasco. It's kind of like Benghazi or whatever, right? Like when you have Americans die like in some weird way, it just becomes like a lightning rod for political, attention. And because of the attention that comes from this and the way that he's kind of like brash and outspoken, and it's also like kind of hard to gauge, right? Because he wrote this book. So you have to like use some discretion on when he's being deceitful or not. And like he speaks in absolutes in a way that's a little sketchy to me. It's like, we'll be like, our company is phenomenal and we've done everything perfectly. You're like, are you though? It's a little weird that you're that absolute about it. But and he's like, we did nothing wrong, and the only reason these Americans died is because of the restrictions placed on us by the U.S. government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what my original point was that I don't remember. I lost my train of thought.
It was something about.
I guess. Who were we talking about? We were talking about Congress. Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. So after this, they just get too much congressional heat. They get lawsuits from the people who died under Blackwater's. They were Blackwater contractors that died in Iraq, and they have lawsuits from the families. They changed their name to Z, XE.
I love it.
And the reason is because like it's the chemical
like
symbol.
Ether.
What's up?
Like ether or something. It's supposed to be all over the place, but nobody knows.
Yeah. It's like Z, like xenon is like the XE is the symbol for xenon, which is like an inert gas, which means that like it has no smell or no trace or whatever. So like they changed the name of the company to this thing that just like is there, but just has no like known appearance or whatever. It's like ridiculous. And then like they get caught like, oh wait, this is just Blackwater under a different name. So they changed it one more time to something else that I don't remember.
But also, I remember thinking that the amount of money that they gave to the families of those soldiers or those contractors who died was so laughably small. It was like $30,000.
Oh my God. Have you ever seen the movie Restrepo?
Yeah.
It's like a documentary where they're in Afghanistan or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, they like kill like some farmer's like brother or whatever because the thing is a terrorist. And they're like, fuck, here's like $800. Like, we're sorry. But it's literally like have some like weird like redneck like explain to him that they're sorry, but like he obviously doesn't care and just like throws him $800. He's like, we're cool, and then walks away.
And I think I have some quarters.
It's ridiculous. I know. It's so ridiculous. But yeah, this book was fascinating though, because like I said, you just don't read like pro military industrial complex stuff. That's true. Also, like I believe that Blackwater is probably better than the military. Like it's probably less sketchy than the military, honestly.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's really weird, especially in the context of like this modern world and the fact that like the concept of military itself is also totally changing. And then like as it has been for like I guess ever, that like there's no kind of pitched battles anymore that people fight. And then in the future it'll just be more like drones and stuff like this, and you know, like Boston Dynamics kind of thing going on.
Yeah, I'm well aware, man. That company should be outlawed, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's crazy.
How is this legal? Like you see that video of the robot doing like a backflip?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Have some fucking robot cop back. Yo, RoboCop. Apparently that's why, like so it makes like no fucking sense how prolonged this Iraq war is, right? Except that like you can use Iraq as like a staging environment for like futuristic police forces. So like I think that a lot of stuff that's going on in Iraq right now is like A/B testing for like things that can be like domestic police.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Or also I think the fact that once the US government enters a place and sets up military bases there, they just never leave. Like in Germany, there's still giant US military like facilities there. Like the city of Stuttgart has like a huge military base there, and like there's so many Americans all over the place. And they just like I guess will never leave. Like also Guantanamo Bay, I cannot understand how this communist country of Cuba just allows a giant US military base. Like how does that work?
I have no idea. I'm out of my element here.
It's so insane, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Anything else you want to say before we close this episode?
I want to say something cool like Walter Cronkite would.
Yo, I have a dope story to tell about Vegas. If it's probably gonna take like 5 minutes though.
We should do it.
All right, cool. All right, for anyone that's still listening, so I just got back from Las Vegas. I was at DEF CON. And okay, so the story starts with how fucking dope Lululemon shorts are. Do you understand this concept? So like Lululemon makes the dopest fucking shorts ever. It's like all I basically wear at this point. I'm wearing them right now. Yeah, exactly. They're amazing, right?
I don't know. I don't have them yet.
They're called The Short. Yeah, just order like 5 online.
I'll do it.
But anyway, so I was with my buddy, and I was explaining this to him. And we were at the Forum Shops in Caesar Palace, and there's a Lululemon there. So I'm like, you need to try on one of these pairs of shorts, like obviously. So like we go in and like we're talking to the sales associate there, and he goes in the changing room to try on the shorts and ends up buying them, obviously, because they're amazing. But I'm talking to her, and I'm like, okay, so as someone that lives in Las Vegas, what's like some just like funny thing to do or like interesting thing to do in Las Vegas that you wouldn't know to do unless you like lived here? And she's like, oh, there's like a secret room at the Louis Vuitton in the Aria where they have like this dope art installation. And I'm like, whoa, that sounds really interesting. Secret room at a Louis Vuitton at the Aria. And I'm like, can you just like go to it? She's like, yeah, you just like ask them to go see like the Drake room, right? It's called like the Drake room because like this video, like there's the music video for Hotline Bling by Drake. Can you picture this in your head?
Yeah,
it's like very like
exactly what it looks like.
So he's like in this like light box where it's like all these different
with the
colors,
stairs and stuff.
Yeah, so this like artist named James Terrell like made like this weird secret room in Louis Vuitton into that Drake room where it's like he like calls it like a color bath where it's like you go into this white room, everything is white all around you, and then just colors blast on the walls.
That's amazing.
And it's like you're getting bathed in color. But it was like this really low key thing for a while. I think it's been there for like 3 or 4 years. But like it was only for like celebrities and like really DL like shit. And now it's like more in the public, I guess.
Cool.
But anyway, we end up at some point in this trip to Vegas in the crystal shops of the Aria. And we go to the Louis Vuitton. And it's so funny because we're like, drinking like tall boys. Like, dude, we can't ask to see this room with like these tall boys. We have to like get rid of these. And then we're wearing like our nerdy like DEF CON badges, which are, whatever. But we go to the guy and we're like, yo, can we see the Drake room? And he's like, yeah, you got to like reserve this like months in advance. There's no way like you're seeing it. And they're like, that's okay. And then we start like hang out and like talking with them. But then he realizes like we're like just like normal people and not like these like rich douchebags that are like, I need to see the Drake room.
Yeah.
He's like, all right, let me see what I can do. And he like calls some person. And okay, I swear to God, this is like an episode of fucking Black Mirror where this girl, like her name's Naomi, of course, because you have to have like some weird space in me. I'm not even sure. She comes out, she's wearing all white, but it's like all white Louis Vuitton stuff. Dope. It's so crazy. And like has like a clipboard and it's like, follow me. Of course, she has a British accent, right? She's like, follow me right this way.
Yeah.
And like we get into an elevator. And like we go up to like the 3rd floor, and like it's so funny. It's like a Louis Vuitton retail store. Like why are we in an elevator, right? And it's literally an episode of Black Mirror when we get out of where there's like 3 people all dressed in white Louis Vuitton stuff at like a desk, and it just says like a cob on it, which is like some Egyptian word that means like bath or something. Huh. Like it's not Arabic, but it sounds like it would be Arabic, but it's not like a word I recognize.
Cool.
And we have to like sign a waiver. It's like this 4-page waiver where they give you, and you like sign it, and it's like. I swear to God, it's a plot of a Black Mirror episode. We're like, what the hell is going on? And then like this, like we have to take off our shoes and put on these like, you know, like things that don't scuff the floor and whatever. And we walk into this like giant white room, and it's like this 10-minute art experience where you just like have like lights blasting at you, and like you can't like it's supposed to like change where you can't tell if like sometimes it looks like you're right against a wall, and sometimes it looks like an infinite tunnel and whatever. Yeah, it was freaking nuts, dude.
That's awesome.
Like, yeah, that was that's a weird Vegas story, but obviously every time you go to Vegas, you have to have crazy Vegas stories. So
yeah, they're supposed to stay in Vegas, aren't they?
Yeah, but that wasn't anything bad. It was just like
okay.
There's a secret room at a Louis Vuitton in the Aria that has this crazy art exhibit in it.
Fair.
All right, cool. Anything else before you have your Walter Cronkite line?
No, I forgot it, but stay tuned. I'm gonna figure one out.
All right, cool. And yeah, we're going to try to do these every week. So I think we're going to try posting them every Friday for the next, 2 months and just see how this goes.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
All right, cool.
I think it's good night and good luck, isn't it?
Yes.
Good night and good luck.
All right, cool. Peace.